we're invoking, you can find them all in literature and philosophy and music. You don't need to go to Bronze Age Palestinian morality tales for any of this. But you're wrong, I'm afraid, and Dawkins is right in saying that religion and science are necessarily opposed. If religion has any claim at all to make for itself, it's that it claims to understand that there's a purpose in the universe directed at us, and that it can tell us what that purpose is. Right? Well, that's a false explanation of reality, and false explanations of reality are often not just mistaken; they lead people into making terrible mistakes.
Let me thank you, Graham, for your call. We're going to get as many of you on as we can with Christopher Hitchens. David, good morning.
Good morning. I've been a great follower of Mr. Hitchens for many years and agree with him on many things and disagree with a few. I probably disagree on this one. And here's a quandary I'd pose for you, Mr. Hitchens. You're speaking, if I can make a funny pun, I hope, you're preaching to the choir in San Francisco. This is the most secular, atheist kind of a community one could practically find on planet Earth and ever in history. But what's interesting is that you've been a very strong supporter of the Iraq War, as am I.
David, forgive me for saying this, but we are not only heard in San Francisco, we are heard in all the surrounding environs and now all over the world. So
okay, well,
let's just factor that in.
You get the point,
yeah.
Right. So the point is that Mr. Hitchens has been a very strong supporter of the war in Iraq, a lot on humanitarian grounds, opposing horrific dictatorships and control of authoritarian and dictatorial figures and so on. What's amazing is that in America, at least, the secular left has been the most opposed to the war, and the conservative religious folks have been the most supportive. And I find that quite ironic, and I hope you will take that as a little bit of a sign that perhaps religion is not the only evil in the world, that apathy, that secular dogmatism, and other factors can also be terrifically horrific, for other people.
I know just what you mean. As a matter of fact, though, most of the religious forces around the world and in America were opposed to the removal of Saddam Hussein. The Catholic Church more or less officially was. So was the Church of England. The Methodist Church, which is the one the President belongs to, very strongly against. And of that Christian right of which we hear so much, actually most of them not very interested in Iraq. It isn't a popular issue among Republican core voters and never has been, the Iraq question. However, so I differ with you slightly on that. On the whole, the religious utterly failed the Iraqi people. They said, we don't care if you go on being owned by a psychopathic dictator. The secular left has a problem not just with Iraq, but it's had a problem ever since the rise of Islamism began, political Islamism, of appearing to make excuses for it, to euphemize it, in other words. You hear in a lot of left talk about the jihad a certain tone of voice, how shall I describe it, as if these people were promoting some sort of liberation theology, that bin Laden is in some sense an expression of protest against poor conditions in the third world. I think it's because Islam is identified on the whole with brown-skinned countries, that subliminally some people on the left feel it must be a religion of the oppressed, whereas in fact it's the religion of the Saudi Arabian royal family. In particular, the Wahhabi version that threatens us is preached and promulgated by people who are extremely rich and extremely privileged and exploitative, to say the least. But that's been an argument I've had not just over Iraq, but over things like the fatwa against Salman Rushdie, the Taliban, and indeed the events of September 11th itself.
Apropos of that, and let me thank the caller.
There are people, in other words, who say if only there was a Palestinian state, this wouldn't have happened. People who are that stupid.
Here's Hugh, who says, it's always refreshing to hear Mr. Hitchens articulate the vision of secular democratic values. However, given his atheist and rationalist values, it seems odd to me that he feels so comfortable siding with the Bush administration on Iraq. Are we really to believe that the most religious president in recent history is interested in bringing secular democracy to the Middle East?
The president isn't the most religious in recent history. That honor would have to go to Jimmy Carter, who's now, for some reason, a hero to a lot of liberals. I cannot understand why. In his most recent book on the Israel-Palestine question, he says the problem with Israel is it's become too secular, that it's turned away from God. So we have someone who was president of the United States who thinks everything in the Middle East would be better if Israel was more orthodox. Can you imagine the stupidity of that? With the president, I think there's a paradoxical position. You identify my position as paradoxical or as ironic. It's ironic to be Bush and to have to hope, as he does have to hope, that secular forces emerge in Iraq and Afghanistan. the whole axis and fulcrum of American policy depends upon the emergence of such forces, and wherever we find them, the Republican administration tries to nurture them. If that's an irony at their expense, I think it's a good one. Every member of the 82nd Airborne could be a believing snake handler, for all I know, but the fact is they're guarding the frontiers of secularism against religious barbarism, and that's the point to keep your eye on.
There's another listener who says, because there are rewards, Hitchens devalues Christian good works as devalued altruism. In that particular example, he presumes that Christians do the good work specifically to get the reward and assumes that Christians are looking to get credit for altruism. This assumes that Christians are looking to get credit for altruism, and this kind of leap deserves challenge. Example, Christians may well choose to be what God has asked them to be with a different purpose in mind. Jesus said, and this is from Matthew, in the same way, let your light shine before men that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven.
Well, doesn't that make my point for me? People want their lights to be admired now.
But there may be altruism just based on wanting to do good deeds without thinking there's an after reward.
Sure.
I think that's what he's implying.
Well, then why call it Christian? Why on earth call that Christian? I mean, the most famous story, it's in Luke, as you'll know, sir, is the parable of the Good Samaritan, which is a man who goes out of his way to help a fellow creature in awful distress and to express solidarity with him. Well, this story is quite clearly not a Christian story, because Jesus of Nazareth, if he ever existed, is talking about someone who may or may not have existed, but who's in the past, so clearly wasn't motivated by Christianity to stop by the side of the road and help someone who was near death. You don't need any supernatural justification for doing that. I like to give blood, for example. I don't do it as often as I should, but it gives me pleasure because I like to help out the health service, as it were. And I don't lose a pint because I get it back again in a few hours, a nice hot cup of tea. But someone gains a pint. That's a positively pleasurable transaction for me. What more do I have to invoke? What's the Gospel of Matthew got to do with it?
I'm going to go to more calls. Just a quick thing, though. When you were 9 years old, I think you noticed in this reconfiguration of the cosmos or whatever was going on in your mind that if God could heal, or if Jesus could heal, excuse me, and change blindness, then why not just do away with blindness utterly and entirely? If he could make the blind man see, then why not get rid of blindness, or something along those lines?
Yes.
Which is an interesting axiomatic way of seeing.
I mean, there's got to be suffering, of course, because otherwise we wouldn't have anything to learn from. But I perhaps wasn't as aware of that when I was 9 as I would be now. But there seems to be quite a lot of unnecessary, needless suffering that doesn't teach us anything.
Do you know,
except probably that these events are random, which is the most important thing to understand, that we are not, in fact, the center of the universe. The universe doesn't know we're here. As Auden puts it in his lovely poem, The More Loving One, looking up at the stars, I know quite well that for all they care, I can go to hell.
Yeah. Well, let's go to more calls. It's Milo's turn from Palo Alto. Good morning.
Good morning. I wanted to comment on Mr. Hitchens' allusion to the similarity between swine flesh and human flesh. That's a delightfully ironic but somewhat poetic rendition. Marvin Harris has written a couple of books. One is called Cannibals and Kings, The Origins of Culture. The other was called Cows, Pigs, Wars, and Witches, that shows the ecological basis for the taboo of swine flesh among desert peoples and the taboo of cattle flesh among the Hindus. Those traditions are consistent with their ecological needs. Thank you.
Well, with the Hindu, my understanding is that there was a time when there was a danger during a drought that people would, a drought and a famine, that a large number of people in India would just kill and eat all their cows, which would mean that the next famine would be much worse. And so it was decreed by some intelligent Brahmins that the cows be made sacred so that this slaughter wouldn't devastate the economy. I don't know if that's the ecological example you have in mind. With the way you can find in archaeology in Palestine whether an old settlement is Jewish or not is, which all archaeologists do anyway when they go to a village, is they go to the rubbish dump, because that's where you find all the most intriguing stuff, what people throw away, and you dig down through the layers. And in some hill towns you find there are no pig bones. And then you know, there are other reasons will confirm it, but that was a Jewish settlement. It goes back a long way. And some you'll find that there are. which means that people were eating them but not dying of trichinosis.